Hi, my name's Carolina from Always Expect More, and today I'm going to show you how to turn t-shirts into a quilt. Ready? Let's get started. To make our t-shirt quilt, we're going to need some supplies. You'll need lots of shirts, a press cloth, lightweight fusible interfacing, fabric for your borders, a rotary cutter, mat and ruler, pair of scissors, iron and ironing board, and a sewing machine. We're going to start by cutting our shirt. Cut all the way up one side. Up to the armhole. Cut from the sleeve in to the armpit. Then cut your top. Start from the sleeve or the neck end, it doesn't matter, and just cut all the way across. Repeat with the other side, and you'll have both a front and a back that you can use for your quilt. To decide what size our quilt blocks are going to be, we want to measure the designs on our shirt. We want to make sure that the entire design or the entire part of the design that we want will fit on our blocks. This design measures 14 inches. I've measured the designs on the other shirts, and a 15-inch block will work perfectly. If you're using different size shirts, like a bunch of kids' shirts from your child growing up, where you have larger sizes and smaller sizes, you can cut those to whatever size you like and add borders so that the blocks will end up the same size. Cut your pieces of fusible interfacing a couple inches larger than your finished block size. If you're using dark shirts, you'll want to give yourself at least 4 inches on either side. With a light shirt like this, we can see the design from the back. We're going to fuse the interfacing onto the back of the shirt. This interfacing is thin, and the purpose of it is to remove some of the stretch in a shirt. I'm sure you've noticed when you've put on a shirt that shirts have a lot of stretch to them. This is great for putting on shirts and for wearing them, but becomes troublesome when you're putting together a quilt. That stretch can make it hard to get your blocks even. Adding this interfacing makes it a lot easier when you go to sew. Use a press cloth, which is really a fancy word for a spare piece of fabric or an old dish towel, to protect the interfacing and your iron. Follow the manufacturer's instructions to fuse the interfacing in place. Now that we have our interfacing on the back, we're ready to cut our block. We're making 15-inch blocks, so I'm centering the design. About a 1/2 inch below and about a 1/2 inch above for this design. And I'll just give it a quick mark. Here, the design is about 8.5 inches, so I have to do a little math to figure out where I need to center it. Or, since this is 8.5 inches, 4 1/4 would be the center, and 1/2 of 15 is, quick math, 7.5. You can use the registration marks on your ruler to line everything up and keep it straight. With this one, because there's more registration on the top, my design will be more square in my block if I cut the top and bottom first. Remember to close your rotary cutter when you're not using it. You can line up here and here to make sure your blocks are square. Repeat this with all of your shirts, fronts and backs if you like, or just the fronts or just the backs, until you have enough blocks to make the size quilt you want. Once all your blocks are cut, you can lay out your design. If you have a design wall, you can use it, but a floor works great. Just lay out the blocks to decide which ones you want next to each other. Then you sew these blocks into rows. To sew your blocks together, put them right sides together. Line up the edge you're going to sew, then put it under the machine and sew from one end to the other. I like using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but for a t-shirt quilt, any consistent seam will keep your quilt square. If you find that you're having puckering problems, you can pin your quilt blocks together. Repeat to make all of your rows. Before you stitch your rows together, press your seams to one side. If you press one row to the right and the next row to the left, this will help you lock your seams when you stitch the rows together and your points will match better. Place one row on top of the other, just like we did with the blocks, just a little more fabric this time. And instead of just matching up the edge, match up your seams. Adding a pin here will help keep it square when you're sewing. Sew your rows together just like your blocks. Put it underneath your presser foot and sew all the way to the end. When you get to a pin, don't just stitch over it. This can really damage your machine. Go up to the pin, remove the pin, and keep sewing. Once you have all the rows sewn together, you sew the rows to each other to make your finished quilt top. After your top is complete, it's time to add borders. Your borders can be as wide as you want. In order to determine how long you need to cut your borders, measure one side, then the other side of the quilt. You might get 50 inches on one side and 52 inches on the other side, because sometimes things aren't exactly perfect. Add those together. 50 plus 52 is 102. Then divide it in half. So you're getting 51. Use that measurement to determine the length of your borders, and that way your quilt will end up more square. Do the same with the top and bottom borders, stitch those on, and now your quilt is ready for quilting. Once you've made the quilt top for your t-shirt quilt, you'll want to quilt it and bind it. You can send your quilt top to a long armor and have them professionally quilt it, or you can quilt it yourself. This t-shirt quilt was quilted just using a walking foot. You can find lots of information on quilting and binding online as well. I hope you enjoyed learning how to make a t-shirt quilt today. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more crafty awesomeness, and catch the details below.